Hello, today I'll be doing a review of the Beyerdynamic DT1990 Pros. I wanted to try something different and I didn't feel like recording in the bathroom, so we're going to be doing something different today. So hopefully the video and the audio quality isn't that bad. So let's go ahead and get into it. We're going to start with the box and the accessories for this headphone. Inside of the box we have a cardboard piece that holds the manuals. It comes included with a portable hard carry case. They give you a spot here to place the ear pads. So it comes with two sets of ear pads. These are the analytical pads, and you can store the extra pads here. And the headphones go here. And if you have the headphone collapsed pretty far down, you should still be able to close the case. And on the top here, they do give you a bag that has a zipper. And you can store the two cables that it comes with in here. It will be a tight fit if you plan on storing both cables in there. And that's basically everything on the portable case. So you get a coiled cable. It's about 3 to 4 feet long, and you can always stretch it out. It terminates in at 3.5, and it has a 1/4-inch screw-on adapter. And the headphone connection is a mini XLR 3-pin. Comes with a second cable. It's just a regular rubberized cable like you'll find on a Sennheiser 6XX, for example. This one's a little bit longer. It's about 8 to 12 feet. And it also comes with a screw-on adapter. So that's 3.5. And you can put the 1/4-inch on like this. And that plugs in like that on one side. And they have a button here that you press down and you pull. So that's basically everything on the accessories. The only other thing that it comes with is these extra set of ear pads. These are the analytical pads. And you can tell that by looking at these 4 circles on the back. Since the balance pads will have multiple circles around the ring. Now these pads are velour, as you can see. I don't think these are memory foam. And the balance pads are exactly the same. The only difference is they did some different tuning on the back, for example. So let's go ahead and get into the build now. Start off with the top here. It says Beyerdynamic. And I believe this might actually be real leather. Probably one of the only headphones that has real leather on the headband. And while we're talking about build, let's go ahead and talk about comfort as well while we're at it. So on the bottom here we have this other padding here, and there's like a little crease in the middle. Now the comfort on this headband is not that great, because after about 2 to 3 hours the top of my head starts to hurt. It does distribute the weight across the head, so it's not like it's one spot like in the middle or something. It's just for some reason this headband is not very comfortable. So for example, another headband that's kind of similar to this would be like the focal elear, and I find that much more comfortable than this headphone. So on the outside here, I believe this might be metal. That's definitely metal, this here. And then on the outside of the cup, this part here, this might be plastic, I'm not sure. And you do get exposed wires, which is not that great, I want to point out. But overall, the headphones are very pretty and very well built. And that's what the other side looks like. And it has a little made in Germany down here. Now let's also talk about the comfort on the ear pads. Now out of the box, these headphones have a lot of clamp, so they're not that comfortable for me. So I don't really consider the comfort on these headphones to be that great. I really like the build quality, but the comfort is not that great, because the headband starts to hurt after 2 or 3 hours, and the clamp on these headphones are a little bit too tight. It's almost as tight as like the 6XXs, but those loosen up over time. Now I did have these for a few months, so they have loosened up. So the ear pads are at least gotten to the point where they're at least tolerable, so decently good. But the headband still kind of sucks. And also another point that I want to point out is that inside of here there's not a whole lot of room for your ear. I just barely have enough. There is some nice cushion here, but I do touch the bottom just a tiny bit, unless you want the top to touch a little bit. But it's kind of a tight fit. I personally like my pads to have a little extra room, but the primary concern is the clamp force, because the material on this is very nice. This is very nice material, and it's just that the clamp is not that loose. It's a little more tight than I would like. Alright, so that's everything on build and comfort. So let's go ahead and talk about sound now. So first up, we're going to talk about the different ear pads. So you get 2 sets of pads. These are the analytical pads, and the ones I have on there are the balance pads. When I first got these headphones, the first time I listened to them, they had the analytical pads on there. And I did not like these headphones, not really a whole lot. But once I switched to the balance pads, the headphones were a lot better with those on. So let me go ahead and explain why I don't like the headphones with the analytical pads. So what are the difference between the pads? First off, the balance pads will give you like a bass shelf, but I don't really like to call it a bass shelf, because the bass on these pads are not boosted or emphasized in any massively way. So I do not consider these headphones bass headphones. But with the analytical pads, the bass is way too lean sounding and not very full. Another difference is that with the vocals, these pads sound a bit more nasally, and also a little more grainy or muffled sounding with the analytical pads. Another difference is that the balance pads definitely help in terms of soundstage and depth, which is basically the same thing. So these don't have as much soundstage, but that's not a massively that's not a massive concern. The major concern of why I do not like the analytical pads is because of the treble. So I'm going to use an analogy here. Let's say you have a laptop and you're playing music out of the laptop speakers. So you'll understand that the bass is not really there all too much, and the laptop speakers have a really hard time producing the treble in a very good way. That's kind of like what the analytical pads are. Now, I will say that these headphones sound, even with the analytical pads, sound a lot better than the laptop speakers. I'm just using an analogy. And the analogy is that with the analytical pads, the treble is very shrill and like tinny sounding. It does not sound good at all. And I know there's other reviewers on the YouTube that say that they like the analytical pads, but I think the analytical pads sound quite terrible. And most of the EQ presets on the internet are with the analytical pads. I don't really find many EQ presets with the balance pads. So that's just something to tell you there. So if you are going to use the analytical pads, you're most likely definitely are going to have to EQ. Now, I want to point out that with both pads, these are very bright headphones. Now, I also have Fostech T50 Mark IIIs. Now, the stock pair have Deconi pads on them, and that headphone does not work because it's way out of balance. And what that means is that the treble, that headphone is just treble murder, where it's just a really sharp, very forward treble. These headphones are very bright, but I don't find them as sharp, and they're definitely nowhere near as forward. So they're definitely more balanced than those headphones. That's a headphone that just gives you an example of what a really forward and sharp sounding headphone sounds like. Those Fostech T50 Mark IIIs with the Deconi pads do not work. So the treble is not as forward on this, but these are very bright headphones. So also back to the analytical pads, the treble will sound very tinny, shrill, more sibilant, and more sizzly. And it just don't really sound that great with these pads on there. Alright, so let's go ahead and do some comparisons now to the other headphones that I have in terms of sound quality. So we're not going to talk about these pads no more. We'll talk about with the balance pads on these headphones. First off, let's start with the treble. Now, I still like the treble better on the hifiman Anandas, which is another headphone that is rather bright. Even with the balance pads, the treble is still rather bright. The quality is still not that great, and there's still a little bit of you can still hear the tinniness even with these pads. It's just reduced, and the shrillness and the sibilance. It's just the treble on the hifiman Nandas are much better if you're looking for a very bright headphone. And then also the focal elears have a lot of treble, but I consider that to be a little bit more flat. And then you have some headphones that are a little bit darker in the treble, like the M1060C or the Edition XX, but I wouldn't really call them that dark. But overall, the treble on these headphones are still very bright, and there still is some sibilance and tinniness with the audio. So let's go ahead and talk about bass now. Like I've said with the analytical pads, the bass is a little bit too lean, but with the balance pads, you get a good amount of bass, but I do not consider these headphones a bass headphone. Let's talk about extension. These are probably one of the dynamics that I currently own that has very good sub-bass extension. But also the focal elears, or elegias, especially the elegias, for a dynamic headphone, has very good sub-bass extension. But these have very good sub-bass extension. So if you put some like movie soundtracks on that have that really rumbly, deep note type of music, these will extend into the sub-bass very good. It's not really, with the balance pads, it's not that emphasized though. So it's not like bass head. I have a few other headphones that kick or punch a little bit stronger, like the hifiman HE6 SE, for example. But that headphone is really hard to drive, and most of my amplifiers that I have don't really sound too great on that headphone. So I haven't really gotten to the full potential on those. But when it comes to these are very hard to drive. These are 250 ohm impedance. So you will need a little more juice with these, but all the amplifiers I have can run it just fine. So if you have something like a JDS Labs Atom, that'll be perfectly fine. As long as you don't have like HE6 SEs, most amps won't be able to run that. But this headphone, it is harder to drive than normal. So don't try to plug this into like a computer motherboard. You're probably going to max out the volume and it still might not be loud enough. But back to the bass. Now with the balance pads, the upper bass and the mid bass does get a tiny more bloated, but that's just because it's a little more emphasized. But I still don't really consider these headphones to have a whole lot of mid or upper bass, but it does have a good amount with the balance pads. So for example, like the focal elears, those are a good headphone that it actually has a pretty good amount of mid bass and upper bass without it being emphasized. That's basically what the same thing about these headphones are. They're in about the same category in terms of bass. So overall, I think the bass is pretty good on these headphones. The treble is basically the major concern, especially with the analytical pads. So let's go ahead and move on to the vocals. Now this is where, I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but on the analytical pads, the headphone is a bit nasally sounding in the vocals. And one of the major problems with this headphone is it does not like bad recordings. So you want to make sure you use very good recordings on this headphone. Otherwise, you will be able to hear the flaws. And that's where like vocals tend to fall apart, is terrible recordings. Now, I really like this headphone on live recordings that are recorded very well, or anything that's audiophile type of genre that's very well recorded, then the vocals on this will sound very, very good. But if you try to put something that has auto-tune and it's not really well recorded, or maybe you try to listen to some really old music, it's not going to sound good on these at all. So you want to use very well recorded stuff and it'll make the vocals sound a lot better. So these have very good vocals. There's very good texture in the vocals, and it's just, the hifimans though do sound a bit better than these headphones. I just want to point that out. I do like the vocals on the Edition XX or the Ananda a little bit better because there is some sibilance with the vocals on this headphone, and the vocals on the hifimans are a little bit more warmer and a little more full-bodied and a little more natural sounding. While the focal headphones, they kind of have a metallic timbre, and the vocals perform very well. They also have very good texture and detail, but they sound a little unnatural on the vocals. So I personally prefer the vocals on the hifimans instead of these headphones. So next up, let's go ahead and talk about imaging and Soundstage. This is where this headphone shines a lot, is the Soundstage and imaging. So for example, I also did not mention this. This is a semi-open headphone. So it does not sound open like the hifiman or the focal elear. It sort of sounds closed. Now the focal elear is a very intimate and three-dimensional sounding headphone. And then the hifiman is like, it's sort of intimate, but it has a very nice openness to the sound. It just, you can hear like up and down and left and right. It just has a very open sound, and it has some good soundstage as well. This headphone kind of sounds closed, but you get quite a good amount of soundstage. So for example, I consider the focal headphones to have more narrow soundstage than this, and the hifiman headphones have less soundstage as well. And this headphone has about in the same ballpark in terms of soundstage as like the M1060C, or almost like in the same ballpark as the M1060 Opens. Also, by the way, also have the Sende Ivas. Those are a headphone that's a very good example that doesn't really have soundstage. So the fact that this has very good soundstage makes music, when it comes to depth and layering in the music, enjoyable. So that's very good. Another thing that's very good about this headphone, and we're going to go back to the live recordings. When you have, like, let's say a guitar over here, and then somebody's playing another instrument here, this has very good instrument separation. And you can also tell the width of that soundstage very well. So if something's like right here, and you have another instrument over here and another one farther out, this has very good width and very good imaging as well. So when I was playing like some gaming, like Apex Legends is a very good example. This is a very good headphone for gaming, because when I was playing Apex, let's say I was running through the field, right? And there was some guy off to the side, and he was kind of creeping up on me, so he's making some noise in the grass. I was able to tell that really easily and also pinpoint where he was. So this has very solid imaging, this headphone. And it works very well for gaming because it also has very good soundstage. It's not crazy in terms of soundstage, I do want to point that out. It has more soundstage to where I don't consider it narrow. So that's basically everything I probably wanted to talk about these headphones. So let's go ahead and get into the conclusion. Now, do I recommend these headphones? Because these go for about $400 to $500 new. And if you only got the headphones with the analytical pads, I would not recommend the headphones at all, because they don't sound good at all with those pads on there. With these pads, these headphones sound pretty decent. But that's about it, is that they sound decent. I still think the focal elears are better in this price range, and I still also like my Edition XXs better too, even though they might not have as much soundstage. But overall, in terms of sound quality, these headphones are not that great, sadly. And ultimately, I don't really recommend them. So I would recommend you either pick up a focal elear, which can go for around $400 to $450. And if you get one used, you can get it cheap, maybe in like the $350 range, because they have come down in price. Or there's an Edition XX for $500, and I like that headphone a lot more than this. And you know, there's other headphones that cost a little bit more, because sometimes there is some places that sell this for up to $600, and I just think that there's other headphones that are better than this. So that's basically everything I wanted to talk about, so thank you for watching.